When he made the proposal to you about going over to Italy,
Yes.
what was your first reaction?
Oh, I was thrilled,
Yeah.
because for so long I had been doing my best to see if we could open the doors to refugees.
Mm-hmm.
The war was on, but we could get some out. And nothing happened. We couldn't move the Justice Department, couldn't move most of the government. Quotas were rigid, even in the war. Even single humanitarian, everything was according to the present, that kind of law.
Mm-hmm.
And now the president suddenly opens our gates to 1,000. And it was such a wonderful thing, because I could see it was the beginning. And maybe we could begin to save human lives instead of just shooting. So I was thrilled.
When you went over to Italy, as even the movie shows, and you saw that there were so many more than 1,000, well, that must have been heartbreaking.
It was. And though it was said to be 1,000, people didn't like one family. And they talked against them, so the men who were selecting them and following all the orders dropped them.
Then when you bring them over to the United States, of course, what a voyage. That had to be so dramatic for you. I was reading a little bit about the tear-stained diary that you had about that.
Because first they were very reluctant to talk.
Mm-hmm.
But then as we got to know each other better, they began to say, you have to talk, you have to tell my story.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was so tragic or so dramatic.
Right.
So they opened up, my notebooks got filled. But as soon as we landed and I got home to my family in Brooklyn, I said goodbye to the refugees, and they said, you can't leave us now. I said, don't worry, I'll be right back with you, but I have to go home for one night and then I'll come back. So I called Ickes saying, I'm back and I'll come back to Washington tomorrow. He said, no, don't come back. He said, the Army wants this kept top secret, but the press is so furious and shouting and screaming that they finally said, okay, you can have something in Hoboken where we cross over. And you know what? I'll select some of the refugees whose stories I think the press would like most, and I'll type them up fast. I went back to the refugees, kept my promise to them, and then we crossed the river and we came into Hoboken, and there was a table all set for us, and the press was already there, the Times, the Herald Tribune, and so on. I think there must have been about 10 members of the press, all with their hats with press. And the people kept by, and as they kept, I said, you come here. One of the stories I know they would love was not Jewish, but she saved a lot of people. And they caught her, and they put her in a cellar, and she had water dripping on her, and they wanted her to, to tell whom she had saved and how they could still grab them and kill them. And she wouldn't talk for 10 days. Matilda Nate. And when I called her, she said, I'm so scared, I don't know what to say. I said, Matilda, you don't have to worry. your story and your face will be so wonderful for these reporters that they'll fall in love with you.
Yeah.
I'll translate for you. So, of course, she was a big hit.
When the year ends in 1945, the war ends, was it hard to get the president to consider them to stay in the United States, to get the visas to stay? Because I know that was an issue as to whether when they were going to be there temporary and then sent back or stayed in the United States.
Well, they signed a paper before they entered the ship going from Italy that they would return to their countries of origin as soon as the war was over. And they had now had 18 months in America. They had gone to school if they were school age. And we got teachers to come up to teach the elders some vocation so that when they got out, if they could stay, they would have jobs. And I was very careful to make sure they would get jobs. So they became beauty parlor operators, all kinds of jobs. And they wanted to stay by this time. And some of them had sons in our army who had come earlier and were already fighting and were at the front lines. So a whole group got together to try to keep them here. And Treasury and all the other departments were determined that they must keep the president's vow to Congress, and it was to get them in, get them past Congress, that he had opened the doors. And it was getting harder and harder. Somebody in the Justice Department sent him a long letter why he had to keep the promise that the president made. And he used to read this, and I read it, and I said, they sure don't know you, trying to tell a man like Ickes, you have to stick with the law. So Ickes said, you go up to New York, gather up leaders, Jews, non-Jews, bring them down here and come to my office and we'll decide where to go. So I went up to New York. This was all just around in December. Snow up there. Well, you're in the snow belt. I don't have to tell you what it's like. I brought down from Columbia, all over. And we got to Ickes' office. And this guy from the Times, Spiegel, was a real, kind of jumps up and down and really was terrific. Whenever the guys got a little irritated, people like this Steffi Winters, she was a little old to go to high school.
Right.
She was about 20. But she convinced the principal that she wanted education. Yeah. And he let her go to high school. And they remained friends until he died.
Isn't that amazing? When you, do you get together at all with the old, there's a reunion of those survivors from Fort Ontario?
Oh, sure.
Is it sort of an annual get-together, or?
Well, it's not that frequent.
Right.
And then they named a museum up there for me, so that was very rewarding.
Well, extremely well-deserved.